Welcome to MJ Radio. I'm Melinda Joy Pattison, your host. I'm here today with friends and colleagues, Len Schreiner and Victor Nelson, and we were meant to meet today with a third friend, Richard Murphy, Father Richard Murphy, who died last week. And so it felt really important that we would come together and have this conversation anyway, in his precious memory. So join us for this chat about how we came to know this very special man and what our experience of him was and how we're grieving his loss. So there's no real order of things, Victor. Len, we're just gonna jump on in here. And I do want to know initially how you came to know Richard. I came to know him through you, Victor. Yeah. That's how I came to know Richard, through a mutual group that you invited me to, and I met him there, and discovered him to be the chaplain of the state senate, which then led to an opportunity for me to go there and pray over the gathering during the legislative session, and my friendship with Richard grew out of that. And I know also that there are stories, that we all have Richard stories.
Yes.
So, but first, how did you come to know him?
Well, I first met Richard almost 8 years ago, shortly after I moved to Santa Fe. I was invited by another retired Episcopal priest to join him and Richard for coffee. And I learned in that first meeting that this was a conversation I wanted to be part of. Quickly, we were able to share some of the common elements of our different ministry journeys. And I was so impressed at both Richard and Jim, their welcoming and their hospitality. So my relationship kind of grew over that last 8 years of time, where we met almost every week for coffee.
Every week, almost every week for 8 years. I'm a bit envious of that.
Yeah.
Because my relationship with him was not nearly that many years, just a few, 3 or maybe, yeah. And Len, you've come recently to this group, right?
Yeah, I moved to Santa Fe in May of 2018. Took a little time to get the truck unpacked, and then I went to the ILA meeting, the Interfaith Alliance group here that we're part of. And I think it was the first meeting. I just introduced myself as a stranger from Colorado. And afterwards, Victor passed me a note on a little yellow piece of paper.
A Victor note.
Passing notes in class.
Tuesday. And I said, well, how would he do that? Why would he do that? I guess he said yesterday he did it just to be welcoming. He didn't know what trouble it would bring him, but so.
And the note was inviting you to coffee.
Yes, inviting me to coffee, and we sat down, just Victor and Father Richard Murphy. I call him Richard. I know some of you call him Dick. The conversation just flowed very naturally. You know, we talked about ministerial things, stories that we made up from our adventures in ministry, theology, spirituality, family life, everything. So beautiful.
Everything.
So I call them my angels, because it's a total surprise provided by the Spirit.
You mentioned calling him Richard, which is what I always called him. But what's something really sweet to my heart is his relationship with one of my sons, who also worked at the legislature for the Sergeant at Arms in the Senate. And so he got to know Richard. And he always called him Padre, the Padre.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, yeah. And in between legislative sessions, when Richard would not see my son, he would, every time I saw Richard, he would ask
Yeah.
about Reed. And that, so I was just getting blessed all around by that.
I think you experienced something that was part of his nature,
Oh, yes.
of his compassion, his care for people. I was impressed as he shared stories of his ministry. He was still the rector at St. Bede's Episcopal Church when I came to Santa Fe. And then he retired from that position not long after I met him. And he shared stories of hospitality and welcoming and inclusivity that most clergy that I've known haven't had the courage to undertake. And so Richard really impressed me, not just with his local ministry, but with his whole ministerial journey of peacemaking.
I just have the sense that in his last days, if he knew anything about what was going on in Washington, D.C., that he was incredibly troubled in his heart about it. That it would, and heartbroken about it is what I feel.
Yeah.
We talked about this administration, the Trump administration, on a pretty regular basis. I think both in understanding tones, trying to understand the president, trying to understand how did the country get there, sometimes expressing our biased opinion against
which is quite all right to express on this show.
Good.
Good. So,
we're not censoring.
We were all, Victor, I follow news very closely, motivated to do that. And this is, I think, would be aligned with Richard too, because of how policies and presidents affect people, affect the common good. I mean, now that's a principle in Catholic social teaching, and I'm from the Catholic realm or Catholic background. One of the fantastic things that Catholicism has is Catholic social teaching, which is about 100 years old. And things like the dignity of the human person, the common good, the option for the poor, and a number of other ones. There are 10 principles. Those are part of what happens in the Congress and in the presidency that affect the lives of millions of people, millions of people. So that's why I'm always concerned about it. I know Richard was deeply concerned about it. I think I can't speak for him, but we were watching the clock and hoping for the turning of the page, which now we're 7 days away from.
Right.
6 days, maybe.
Yeah. Counting the hours.
Yeah. I was so impressed as Richard shared experiences of his peacemaking efforts in Central America, in Sarajevo, Ireland. And in every case, he was able to talk about finding commonality between warring factions or between differing ideologies. And I think that was a gift of his, about being able to bring people together. And in fact, we had conversations about this, if you recall, Len, about all of the troubles here in Santa Fe at the plaza. And we were saying Richard would be an ideal person to do some community conversation, to bring people together in order to honor all of the traditions and not just promote, one tradition or one perspective.
As a peacemaker,
Yes,
you're
as
saying.
a maker. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Isn't it just, does it blow your mind as it does mine, his relationship with the Desmond Tutu?
Yeah, yeah. Like really. Yeah.
And his wonderful stories about that man and uh, being his student. Just, I love those stories.
Yeah.
I love those stories that he shared.
And the work he was doing at Oxford University, he made a conscious decision a few years ago not to complete that work. But the focus was on this idea of the beloved community. And
I remember those words
and,
coming out of his mouth.
and so he really had a passion for how can we promote that idea of the beloved community in our midst.
Yeah, and I think the essential quality that Richard had and manifested was being a calm, peaceful presence himself.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to do any kind of reconciliation work or even stand on a line and face people who have opposite worldview or fighting over a particular life and death issue, you have to be calm yourself and peaceful within.
Mm-hmm.
That's all that I saw in him. A very peaceful person, comfortable with himself, comfortable with other people, comfortable with very difficult issues.
Yeah.
Maybe some of that reflects back to his experience as a probation officer. You know,
Yes.
live with intention and conflict all the time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm just thinking about, I saw him in several different environments. I saw him as the chaplain of the Senate,
Mm-hmm.
blessing with this. The day I went to pray, we were sitting out in the hallway. Len, I don't know if you've been in the Capitol building
Yes. Just
yet,
one.
but there's that hallway outside the legislative chambers, and we were sitting out there waiting a little bit, just visiting till it was time to go in. A woman came up to him and very intent. She was on a mission, obviously on a mission too. And she had something in her hand. I do not remember what it was, but she very specifically wanted the Padres' blessing on this item. And without hesitation, he jumped up, put his hands on her and the object, and blessed it so sweet, blessed her, not only the object, but her. And I was then blessed by the experience and being there. And that what a privilege that was. And in seeing that and knowing that, I know how he impacted others and my son.
Yeah.
And then I saw him in a group context, just chatting about whatever, kind of like your experience with him in that group. I saw him in his priest role at the Episcopal Church, because how many times did he retire? I don't even know.
Right.
But when I experienced him that way, he was assisting at Holy Faith, and he would give the homily at Taizé, and I would go from time to time, and I experienced him that way. And then in the group that you mentioned that I attended for a while, the ILA group, and his presence there, and there was that common factor of this sweetness about his presence.
Yeah.
And I don't think we're overstating it.
No, I don't think so.
In any way.
Back in July,
Mm-hmm.
probably well, I'll just say July because that's the date Richard has on his copy of this. At coffee, we raised the challenge to each other. Well, what would you preach? Since
Right.
most of the three of us are not in the pulpit week after week, Sunday after Sunday. What would you preach in this time? So we all wrote something. I have Richard's copy in front of me. I've been looking over it and reading through it these days.
Good idea.
To go back to your question, how would he feel about the present time? So here's what he wrote, just a couple lines. I'll read. The big question arises, do we hear God in these crises? Do we hear God crying?
Mm.
We feel God hoping that we repair God's world. We should reassure ourselves that God has not abandoned us to a future dystopia. There's a good Oxford level word. If we
Yeah.
look closely and honestly at all these crises, we see our own failures. We see where we have let each other and God's holy ground down. We are not exempt from responsibility. Responsibility was quite a discussion yesterday in the House of Representatives. But I want to read this because this is a wonderful before the grave and after the grave synchronicity for Richard Murphy. In this overwhelming scenario and reality, there is a call to repent and confront our failures.
Mm.
Could that be any more relevant?
Yeah.
As we do this, we cannot do so without a parallel process of building and rebuilding. Sounds like he was the chaplain advisor to Biden and Harris.
Yeah. He certainly could have been. Correct.
Certainly could have been.
So he talked about things in that vein and returning to original goodness.
Yeah.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
that's, I think, part of the process that we're in.
Yeah.
And that reminds me, Len, as you're saying that, talking about these sermons that that you were discussing, I was told that on Holy Faith Church's website, they have a recording, maybe it's video, of his last sermon.
Oh my gosh.
And
I
I have every intention of,
yes.
and I'm glad you mentioned this, reminded me of that. So I must not forget.
Yeah.
Hope they leave it up there for a bit.
Sure.
So we can access it.
Willingness. I really want to listen to that.
Yeah.
Yes. I want to hear his voice again.
Yeah. That's one of the things that I miss the most when one of the people I love leaves. Maybe they don't leave the planet, but they pass to the next dimension. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Just hearing them.
Bring
Yeah.
it back
Yeah.
myself, but
Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, I'd mentioned to you, Melinda Joy,
Yes.
the banner, the wall piece behind me.
Yes.
This was I don't want to call it a souvenir. It was a reminder that I brought back from Madagascar. And many of the families would have a large print like this. Should I focus on that for a bit?
Sure. You can give us a close-up of that.
So
wonderful.
this would be just a community.
That piece has appeared on my show before.
Yes, it has.
Just saying. And that's a really nice view of the top of your head.
Yes,
Victor.
right. So I'll get that out of there too. Yeah. And how I connect this with Richard, I was on a church-related trip. Let me get this back to me. Back in the mid-90s. And these wall hangings all have proverbs. So I brought one back for my daughter that was very apropos. The proverb was, if you travel, you will gather memories. If you stay home, you will gather dust. The one that I chose to bring home, Aitsa Mamali Niratsi Niratsi. So in Malagasy, that means do not repay evil with evil.
Wow.
And that really resonated with Richard, this idea that, you don't strike back evil for evil. And in his peacemaking, he was always trying to find the ways that people could connect. In Madagascar, Lutheran women had an informal mission outreach to Muslims in their community. The church would provide sewing machines. And so the women would have sewing gatherings in their home and invite the neighbors, including Muslim women. And they discovered they had so much in common that their religious differences didn't need to divide them, but they could learn to respect each other's religious differences and different perspectives, but find the commonality over sewing, a piece of cloth. So the proverb, "Do not repay evil for evil," was just very powerful to me.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what I say in inner spirituality is that's how the gospel pops up and appears here and there. And it would be good if more Christians would realize it.
Yeah.
Not confined to the channels or doors of our churches or the communication channels of our thought forms. We think, oh, it was only given to us. Well,
right.
This is a great illustration, Victor, of the gospel pops up right there. Love your enemy. Pray for those who persecute you. Do not return evil for evil. It just comes in another language, in another culture.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Beautiful.
And interesting that, do you think, Victor, that they got that proverb from the Bible as we know it, or did that come organically out of their own culture? I think that's important to note.
Well, and that's a really interesting question, because the Proverbs were not overtly Christian. The Proverbs were for a culture. For a community. So certainly, however it was originally phrased may have come out of a Christian tradition, but it certainly may have come from a Muslim tradition.
Could just as easily have done so. Yeah.
Exactly. So, yeah.
So the conversations that you all, and I'm speaking of you two, Victor, Len, Richard.
Yeah.
Such a diversity of tradition, Catholic for Len, Lutheran for you, Victor, and Episcopalian for Richard. And then I'll throw myself in the mix as a recovering Presbyterian, shall we say. But I also have roots in the Episcopalian Church, in fact, joined. So could I call myself a Presbyterian?
There you go. Yeah. Episcopalian. Yeah, there's something like that.
I prefer the spiritual for label. I'm loving that.
Yeah.
Which makes reference to Len's book. And so I'm just going to say here that both of you have been on my show before now. Len's first episode has not yet been released. I'm sort of saying this for the sake of our audience, but I'll just let our audience know at this point that those episodes are available through Facebook, through my website, and Len's will be too once it's released. And I'm, by the time this actually is out there, Len's will already be out there. So I don't know why I'm giving that big long explanation, but I'm still trying to get reoriented from being out of the country for a month, and so that's where my head is. But back to this diversity of conversation that the three of you, this is why I wanted to have you all on the show to begin with is because I would have loved to be a little mouse under the table hearing all of that conversation. And so, just for an example, what is something of recent note that you were discussing? I know we've already mentioned the political situation in the country, but maybe something of a more, I'm just going to ask you, did y'all ever talk about the doctrine of discovery?
It came up.
Yeah.
Because it did come up. And I think Richard knew more about it than the two of us.
Yes.
I had a kind of brief acquaintance with it, particularly because somebody I had met at a retreat before I moved here, it was a men's retreat in Colorado, was working very intensely on reaching out to Pope Francis related to the doctrine of discovery.
Mm-hmm.
So I got quite interested. All I can do here is make connections, and all of my efforts to cross the bridge or have them cross the bridge failed. But here's what I was trying to do. I had a good shot at it. One of the personal advisors, who's right by the side of the Pope, is a cardinal. This is a special kind of cardinal, Sean O'Malley. When I was in the theologate preparing for the priesthood, Sean was already ordained, and he lived with the poor in Washington, D.C., the country capital. There are poor there. He speaks about 4 languages or 5. Of course, he was at the table with us and with us at prayer. So now he's a cardinal and a personal assistant of the Pope. So I reached out to him the best that I could. Unfortunately, some of my connections through the religious order I was part of, which would go back to him, he's still in that religious order. They're called Capuchin Franciscans.
They're called what, Len?
Capuchin Franciscans.
Capuchin.
A lot of us know Richard Rohr. Richard Rohr is in the OFM, which is one of the branches. There are 3.
Oh.
Rohr is of the Franciscans, and I was of another branch. They're all from the same origin, and there's a third one called conventionals. So Sean O'Malley is a Capuchin working side by side with Pope Francis, probably because of he was an archbishop in Boston, I believe. Anyways, when I reached out to him through the contacts that I had with my former order, somebody dropped the ball. I thought that they would help me get a personal connection to Sean O'Malley. And then, of course, I was going to ask him, Sean, can we work together on getting the Pope to make a universal declaration about our relationship to indigenous people?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think that work is going ahead through one of our local stars here, if he's still local, but he's also international, and that's John Deere. So that gives me a little bit of solace to know that John is still working on this. And John told me himself that he is working side by side with Pope Francis.
Wow.
One of the things is to try to reverse this just war theory that's been an acceptable operating doctrine in the Roman Catholic Church.
Which is a direct connect to doctrine of discovery.
Yeah.
Yep.
Just to make that clarification for people listening. So what brought this to my mind, Len, was when you were saying about this, what was the doctrine from the Catholic Church about humanity? You brought it up earlier.
Catholic social teaching.
Catholic social teaching. And that, my antenna went up because the doctrine of discovery also came from the Catholic Pope in 14 and
I don't have the exact
90 something, before Columbus, in the time of Isabel and Ferdinand.
Yeah, it's very close to that time because they're related. The Pope is basically given permission to colonize, do Christian colonization, and use force. Unbelievable.
Whatever it took.
Whatever it took. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, Victor, I can see your wheels turning over there.
Well, I'm already seeing a conversation that Richard and Len and I would be having about this and connecting it to the political culture right now, where there's such an emphasis on um, white power, you know, that politically the movement over the last years has been toward supporting, promoting more white-oriented power rather than inclusive or multiracial or pan-gender. And so I think the three of us would be talking about that in that context of, you know, here was white European permission, you know, to go and colonize by force. And now we saw it enacted last week where, you know, white Republican supporters took to violence, you know, in order to try to maintain or regain power. So, yeah, I think we would be having quite an interesting conversation about that, Lynn. Yeah.
Well, all of the efforts and things that we talked about, Richard talking about the struggle in Ireland, in Central America, I was a little more familiar with those because I did not go to Central America, but I did a couple of stints after being arrested for protest against the U.S. involvement during the Reagan years in the war in Central America, El Salvador in particular. So all of these things relate to consciousness. If there's something in the collective consciousness,
yeah,
it stays there and it continues to operate and function. So that sense of white privilege is still there.
Yeah.
From
Yeah.
One thing that I found interesting is that during that era when Len was protesting and got arrested, that was the era where Richard was actually doing the peacemaking efforts. So in a strange way, they kind of crossed paths without ever knowing each other at that time, but being involved in the same effort. You know?
Yes. That struck me too, Victor, as was listening to Lynn, that there was a commonality there, and I'm sure that lent itself to these discussions that you would have every week.
Yeah.
Victor, do you remember the story Richard told of being with a group of peacemakers? Was it Central America or Sarajevo, where they were facing an armed militia who had their rifles drawn, and for some time they didn't know if they would get home that night. I don't remember what country that was in.
I'm trying to remember as well, because I think he had some harrowing experiences in both of those countries.
And I remember him telling one about the Eastern European experience, but I'm not remembering the exact details. I don't remember him telling stories about Latin America.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Well, one of the questions I've been wondering about, it's my issue, not Richard's, but I've been wondering about since I'm grieving his loss, is how he was feeling in the last several weeks. And all that I've been able to conclude, Nancy and I were talking about it this morning, is that Richard didn't focus on his own worries or woes, not about any illness that he had or condition. I think he had probably faced the idea of death
Mhm.
long before, and he was reconciled with it. He didn't bring it up.
Yeah.
So
I spoke with Carol, Richard's wife, yesterday, and I think it would be okay to put this out there on the video, that just this past week, literally a couple of days before his passing, she was asking him about a particular decision. And he, in a very gracious way, said, "You are already strong enough and capable enough to make these decisions." He really sort of, it wasn't, I don't know quite how to present this. It was like he was validating her and supporting her at the same time, sort of transferring some of his strength, to her,
Yeah.
that she would be
Oh.
able to manage this and get through whatever. And that was before they were both still being hopeful and optimistic, about what's coming next. But I got such joy out of something that we did talk about right around Christmas time. And Len, you might remember this. He was talking about one of his joys was dancing with Carol in the morning. They would dance together in the morning.
Oh.
And I think it was anticipating New Year's or maybe Christmas morning. But he said, yes, we'll dance in the morning, and that will, be our celebration of our marriage.
Oh,
Yeah.
how precious.
So I had shared that with Carol, and she said, she said, we had such joy in our relationship. And the dancing was just one way we expressed it. Yeah.
Oh, that's so
But
beautiful. Thank
it's
you,
funny
Victor.
because it's like, I never saw Richard as, a graceful man or a dancing man, but it was like, oh yeah, he found some joy with his wife dancing, and they would do, what did he say, Len? It was more like the swing era.
Yeah, he
The
put
big
on dance. I think he said in the kitchen.
that he said what?
But he would put on some music from the swing area, and they would dance. Did he say
In the kitchen.
Yeah, yeah. It was like,
Perfect.
yeah.
Perfect. When was the last time that the three of you were together in person?
Oh Lord.
Not on Zoom,
Yeah.
but in person.
I'll bet it was February, March of last year.
Yeah.
So
Right up until
almost a year ago.
Yeah.
the first warning about COVID
Yeah.
would have been the week before that. We met every week.
Yeah.
Do you remember anything from that particular meeting together?
You're asking two elderly men who's, at least in my case, have
Now,
memory.
I never said that. Just be clear, I did not say that.
Thank you. Yeah. I don't have a specific recollection. I know that we were talking about COVID and the potential threat and danger, but I don't remember specific conversation.
And then did you immediately begin to meet on this way?
Yeah,
Once
it
everything
happened
shut
pretty
down?
Yep, it happened pretty quickly. Yeah, we all became boomer Zoomers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when was the last time you did this?
Well, it would have been right around Christmas time. It was
I think it was the week before Christmas.
week before Christmas.
Probably more like 10 days, because he actually went into the hospital. If he was there 11 days,
Yeah,
maybe it's 2 weeks before Christmas.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
He went into the hospital 2 weeks before Christmas?
No,
well,
no, he came home. Oh goodness, we'd have to do kind of a timeline, but he went in before Christmas, but I don't know that it might have been the week before Christmas.
And he was there, that's when the time he was there for 11 days.
Yeah, yeah.
And then he came home, and he was home just before, until just the day
Yeah.
that he died.
Yeah. I tried to, here's the kind of stories we would share around the coffee table. I tried to sneak in when Richard was at Christus. So I went over. The problem was I went to town on other errands, and I had on a stocking hat and a turtleneck, no collar. But when I got to Christus, I had a card ready to give him, and I wanted to deliver it personally. So I went to the receptionist. It was 2 p.m, and I said, "Well, I'm here for Father Richard Murphy," and he understood that. I said, "I'm his chaplain." Okay, stretching the truth a little bit,
Right.
but I said, I've come to see him. I wondered if I could go up to his room, or if he's able to come here and we could. So he was hesitant. The receptionist was hesitant, and I couldn't get beyond that. The other failure I had was I was an hour after visiting hours.
Mm.
And so he used that technicality to tell me, come back anytime, chaplain, he called me, during visiting hours. So I passed on the letter, and I know that Richard got it. It was a card that Nancy had made, and I had written a personal note in it. So I should have been more of a sleuth and got in there, wore a big collar with a couple of crosses and some kind of a hat.
Right. Yeah.
He would have had to leave me in.
Yeah.
Mm.
When we had our meeting with ILA Tuesday this week, just a couple of days ago, I was touched by how many people were so emotional talking about Richard, and how many of them became involved with the Interfaith Leadership Alliance because of him.
Oh, wow.
He invited people. He would, meet newcomers in the community, new faith leaders, and then say, "Hey, you need to come and meet other folks." And I was very touched. Some people were quite deeply affected. Maybe I should say visibly affected. I think we all were deeply affected. But he perhaps more than most leaders in the community touched lives way beyond just his parish. And I really appreciated that about him.
Yeah. Taking a personal interest was just kind of natural for him. There is a kind of ministry that you can do in which you just fulfill the official capacity, and you move through the role, whatever the role is, whether you're presiding at a liturgy or pastoring in a parish. But then there's another level, and Richard had this at a very natural quality of being personally interested in people. And as the recipient of that, I picked that up immediately.
Yeah.
That he was interested in me, and he was going to invite me to share and invite me to be myself. One of the things I think that we practiced in our little trio at Tribes Coffee was no judgment. We just listened to each other without judgment. We laughed at the stories and the things that we're probably laughing at ourselves to begin with, without judging each other. The way we went about doing something, and able to admit our mistakes.
Yeah.
Keep those secret, but there were mistakes that we made.
Yeah. I just have to share, Len, I had just a real interesting response. Even using the word judgment seemed foreign to me. It's like that wasn't even a possibility with our conversations. And I think, the work you've done on your book on inner spirituality was enhanced by those conversations we had. And Richard's work on his beloved community was enhanced by the conversations we had. My lagging work on hospitality certainly was enhanced by the two of you. And so I think there was something that was greater than the sum of the parts, right?
That's right.
We created something that was more than all of us could have done on our own.
More than the sum of its
Yeah.
parts. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
One thing I shared with the ILA remembrances on Tuesday, Richard had two phrases, and as a therapist, I really key into language and the words people use and the significance of those words. He had two phrases that struck me because they were quite common in his manner of speaking. So he might refer to someone who had passed, somebody from his past, maybe from his probation work. And he would say, you know, I remember Captain so-and-so, God rest his soul. Richard would always put that phrase in when he was referring to someone, God rest her soul, God rest his soul. And so that was just, you know, something that was just naturally a part of Richard. He was always, well, what you said earlier, Len, he was offering that blessing, or well, you said that too, Melinda Joy. He was always offering that blessing, God rest their soul. And then he would also use the phrase, for instance, he would say, you know, Melinda Joy, I'll never forget her. And then he would always use that phrase, I'll never forget him. And I think that's true. It was amazing to me how he could remember details of his relationships from so many decades past. But I think he truly did not forget those people that had been part of his life. And I just
How old was he?
What would you guess? 70?
He told me last, when I last spoke to him, he was 74.
74. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Because I've been guessing, and other people have sort of guessed
Yeah.
in response to my question. So I'm glad to know that he was too young
Absolutely.
to leave us.
Yeah.
He
absolutely.
was too young to leave us. And I wonder, as he offered his blessing to others, might we offer one to him as we kind of wrap this conversation up?
Yeah.
That we might offer a blessing, and whoever wants to. I'm putting you on the spot, but I think you can handle it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Victor, you go ahead. I'm gonna sing the Irish blessing.
Oh,
Precious. Today, the honor guard that we're going to put up for the transfer.
Beautiful.
But
yeah, I'm trying to get a focus on this. How do you bless the blesser? Is maybe to just say thank you for the ways that you've touched lives, that you've touched communities and people. And not only will we never forget you, but we will always live with the blessing you've given us.
That's right.
Yeah.
May the road rise up to meet you. May the wind be at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face. The rains fall soft upon your fields. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hand. May God hold you in the palm of his hand.
Thank you.
So join me if you like, because I feel that you, I'm going to add my song to yours, Len,
good.
and I feel that you probably both know. Agnus Dei, qui tollis peccata mundi, miserere nobis. Agnus Dei, qui tollis peccata mundi, miserere nobis. Agnus Dei, qui tollis peccata mundi, dona nobis pacem.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
I would like that very much.
Yeah.
Rest in peace, Richard. We feel your presence here. We know that though physically you have vacated the planet, we carry you in our hearts.
Yeah.
Onward. And so, listeners and viewers, thank you for sharing with us today our tribute to our friend, Father Richard Murphy, who left us last week. And our hearts go out to all those who are mourning his passing. I'll see you next week.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much, Melinda.
Yeah.
Thank you too so much.
Yeah.